Hi, welcome. So today we're talking about releasing tension. Really important, something that you should be doing throughout your practice, especially if you're someone who actively performs all the time. So it's going to be a really helpful class. So very excited to get going. We'll talk about a lot of different approaches because whenever we're dealing with tension, uh, we run into some problems because when we're starting to really focus on something, like particularly our jaw or our tongue, we start to overly focus on it, right? And then it starts to get engaged just because we're thinking about it. So this becomes one of these weird, vicious cycles. And so we want to have lots of different approaches to seeing if we can release our tension so that we ultimately don't have to think about it too much. Because again, if we're overly focused on any one part of our voice, we tend to lock it up. It's part of this concept of like trying to be in the zone when we're singing. And so we want to do stuff that just regularly starts to relax these muscles, retrains our vocal technique. And it's important to note that we pick up tension from a lot of different things, and it's not always just from our singing. And so we have to be mindful of working out that tension before we start singing, and also just being aware of when we're building that kind of tension. Sometimes it's like, you're grinding your teeth at night and things like that, and it's going to cause some tension that you have to make sure that you work through. So everybody's body is different in terms of what we're struggling with. If you're doing a lot of exercising, these kinds of things, you just want to be mindful of resetting and relaxing your muscles before you start singing. And then we'll talk about some habits that happen when we're singing as well. Please chime in with any questions as we go. And hopefully this will be really helpful. Tension is one of the things that really stops people in their tracks when they're singing. Sometimes it's like pitch matching and those kinds of things make it hard to get going as a singer. But tension is something that happens to a lot of people in the middle of their practice or, of their career, and it can really mess with things. So we want to be very conscientious of it. And so, yeah, let's talk about like, in general, when we're dealing with tension, one of the things that's hard is uh, it's what is really tension, but uh, you know, overuse, misuse, sometimes abuse of a particular thing. Whenever I talk about vocal health things, I like to use those concepts of misuse, overuse, and abuse. It's not that we want things to not move at all, right? So sometimes when we think about releasing tension, we get all sorts of silly things where like you can't really understand what someone's saying. Especially our tongue, when we get to that, is responsible for a lot of important things. And so we want it to be active. We just want to be able to use it the right way. So we're talking about like what's ideal, and we want to find efficiency with these muscles so that they don't max out and get overused. And then sometimes we're using them for the wrong things, and it doesn't actually help or change the sound. And there's better ways. So we want to try to divide up the tasks that our body has to produce singing so that it's not all focused in one place. So those are kind of our overarching principles. So let's talk first about the jaw. So the jaw is tricky. This is what place where we accumulate a lot of tension already from all sorts of things. In general, like we want the jaw to be pretty neutral and passive as we're singing. And this can be very tricky to accomplish. So we'll talk about like what that feels like when we're just using resonance and that inertance force, and that's allowing our jaw to take space and to we want it to move and shape things a little bit, but we just want to be careful that it's not locking in place. So a lot of the times with tension problems with the voice, our vocal folds are trying to find stability so we can maintain a pitch, and all these other muscles try to root down and make that stability. And that's ultimately going to lead to these problems. So the first thing is we're going to deal with the physical process of just trying to relax those muscles. You want to do this before you start singing so that you can have a clean slate to start to work your technique. And this is what, again, makes this sort of vicious cycle. If your jaw is really engaged all the time, it's going to want to do a lot of work while you're singing, and you have to try to reset those muscles first. So I recommend, as a first thing, do a little bit of gentle exercise and stretching before you start singing. And then let's talk about ways that we can start to kind of massage out these spots. So when we're dealing with the jaw, right, we think a lot about this area, but actually the muscles that get really tight are around here. And so I always recommend take some time and really massage through them and feel those little clusters of muscles and just try to kind of wiggle them out. This is a pretty obvious part of it, but trace it along your cheekbone a little bit. And even right there, you might be like, "Whoa, I don't do that." And it hurts. And it's just be gentle with yourself. Give it time. This is a routine that you want to do, and just feel out where these muscles are. Um, One of my teachers back in the day would say we're built like alligators in the sense that our jaw muscles are largely muscles that close the jaw and collapse it. And for chewing and things like that, we actually don't have that many muscles to open our jaw. So we think of trying to like hold open our jaw when we're singing. We actually accumulate a lot of tension that way, and it's not ideal. We're gonna get pretty fatigued trying to do that process. The other thing, and this is something that people don't think about, is massage the areas around the jaw muscles. We want to create space for the jaw to be able to move freely. And a lot of the times we get really rigid because these muscles back behind the jaw are really tight. And so, one thing I'd recommend, if you're not used to doing this kind of self massage, is you can interlace your fingers like this and press like this. And that's a nice way to get a little extra force. You can also just sort of gently squeeze out these areas or use some tools, right, if you have them. But I highly recommend work the muscles that are around and behind the jaw, work these muscles. And then there's also these auxiliary muscles that get involved and connected, like right here. You'll find this if you like wiggle your jaw around and do this kind of stuff, you'll see these muscles actually kind of engage a little bit, and you want to try to get these loose, right? This is when we get those like tension band headaches sometimes. Um, oh, I'm really, really glad. Yeah, this is such an important thing. And sometimes like this opens up your voice more than anything else, is just getting rid of the tension that's blocking stuff. So the jaw and the tongue tend to block resonance, and which is sometimes useful, right? We want to be able to get the right kinds of shapes so we can get certain overtones to vibrate and start to build up momentum and inertance force. And every vowel shape is a little different. We can certainly use our jaw for a lot of stylistic things, but it tends to block resonance. So if it's over engaged, we're producing stuff where breath pressure, our vocal folds are working, and then this is actually working against that at the same time. And so this becomes this vicious cycle. So when you actually let go of these muscles, all of a sudden your voice is much clearer and easier to operate. So massage these areas. Don't forget about here by the temples. Don't forget about behind here. And of course, right where the jaw muscles are. Um, Also, another one that's really good, and this looks kind of weird on on camera. We're going to get to the tongue thing in a sec too. We'll spend a good amount of time there. In fact, it's important to note that I think that it can be really challenging separating out what the jaw is doing versus what the tongue is doing, and you want these two things to function more independently. So as you relax your jaw, it actually helps you understand the motion of your tongue as well. But we'll get to that one very pretty quickly. So one thing, this looks really weird on camera, but I encourage you to explore this, is a sternocleidomastoid stretch. Sounds really fancy, but essentially what it's showing us is that this area of our shoulder, sternum, and the back part of our shoulder are also connected to the jaw muscles. And so you can use this to your advantage. In fact, if you're engaging your shoulders a lot, that's also going to inhibit the motion of the jaw. So one thing you can do is you put your arm behind your back, and this just helps us kind of anchor it. You don't have to do a lot with that. It's just to kind of give us a position here. And then you're going to turn your head up and to the side. And this looks really weird on camera, so bear with me. You go like this, and you come up and over a little bit. So you're getting this twist. You're pulling at this angle, your shoulder, and then you're going to want to open your jaw and breathe in and swivel. And if you've got tension, you're going to feel it all kind of through here in the face. So it's over to the side and then up a little bit. And you kind of yawn. can kind of wiggle your jaw around a little bit. And then you do it on the other side. And so you have to really breathe into the stretch to activate it. So again, got this going here, going up, over. I see this side actually for me is tighter than the other side. And so that's something I'm just taking note of. Okay. For some reason, I play guitar. So probably something with what I'm doing with my guitar. So I feel that I breathe in and I swivel a little bit. You're gonna feel all this stretch through this whole area, and you'll feel it kind of through your whole face. So it shows you how interconnected all of this sort of um, all the whole myofascial system is, right? Which is really really wild. So that can be a really really helpful stretch, and it's kind of a weird one. You have to activate it by kind of yawning and breathing. Um, yeah. So yeah, yeah, so definitely when we're tight and we're locked in place, it can sometimes make us ride a little sharp and increase sort of the brightness of our tone, taking us a little more towards that sort of shouty kind of technique. So yes, tension can definitely affect a little bit with pitch, but mainly with the timbre, and those two things are kind of intricately connected, 100%. So although tends to be more vocal support stuff, right? And then again, the issue is that people are using these muscles to try and create the stability. And so if you're trying to create pressure with these muscles, uh, it can kind of adjust the pitch, right? People can sing this way with their throat a little bit, but it's ultimately going to be on borrowed time. So yeah, isn't that a funny? It's a really cool, actually very helpful stretch, and it just shows you how all of this stuff is really interconnected behind here to our shoulder, and through the face. And so yeah, sternocleidomastoid stretch, really great. In fact, another thing you can do too, if you're not, if this feels kind of hard on your fingers to like do these sort of massaging things, you can use like a tennis ball or something like that and gently sort of lower yourself onto it. Careful of not kind of sort of tweaking your neck and things like that, but you can kind of roll around on that. You can also get these fancy balls that are different levels of hardness, and you can use them to just roll around on that. And then you're going to get that really loose, floppy jaw. So let's talk also about jaw motion too. So one danger that people have is this concept of like you need to open your mouth when you're singing more. Yes, that sometimes when we have different sort of space with our jaw, it helps us with certain kinds of tone changes, and we just want to be careful that we don't overuse this or move our jaw in a way that's inappropriate for how it really moves. So we want to be careful that we don't just try to drop the jaw straight down. It doesn't really function that way. So if you're going like, and you see how these muscles kind of like pop out, that's really really harmful on the whole system. It's going to block your resonance, and it's also going to really start to fatigue these muscles over time. So really what you want to look at, and it's cool to do this in the mirror and just really see how your face is moving as you use your jaw, is think of it like a swivel, right? It goes like that. So and you see, right, how like all of these muscles back here have to move a little bit too. So that's why I talk about sort of massaging and opening all this stuff up so it gets flexible. Do a little bit of light exercise, take a warm shower, things that are going to help you get this loose and ready to go before you start practicing. And then feel that sort of gentle swivel, right? The jaw really slides back like that, like a little hinge. And you can gently sort of guide it with your fingers too as you sort of relax that. That's really all it can do. And it doesn't really open that much, right? Again, those muscles aren't really designed to do that. So that can be a red flag when someone is trying to get you to um, like hold your mouth or your jaw open like that. Sometimes, so there's a subtle difference when the jaw is relaxed and we're singing well, and I'll show you this, and we have good back pressure. You're gonna feel this sort of like internal kind of stretching. And that's the kind of space that we're going for. It's more internal, right? An inner smile is one thing that my teacher back in the day would say. So this feeling of kind of going out your back molars and hinging. So when I'm talking about jaw motion, it's actually helpful to think of this sort of horizontal plane. Um, yeah, yeah. So we're gonna talk about that, and it's something that you'll feel as you're singing. So when the jaw is neutral and relaxed enough, the inertance and back pressure will actually help keep that all open and hanging. But we'll do some exercises to feel that out. So the first thing is just really work the muscles, because it's going to be impossible to actually work the technique until you've just got a little bit of space to work with, and you got those muscles to relax a little bit. You might feel like face is a little drawn, that kind of sensation, right? So that's the first thing. Another thing, and before I forget to, again, when we're really focusing on these muscles, sometimes we can get in this sort of spiral and then we're overly focused on it, right? And it gets kind of worse. Another thing you can kind of do is this sort of gentle tapping thing. I like to do this sometimes with my exercises, just to kind of stimulate things a little bit, kind of reset the muscles. So that can be another helpful trick. If you're, sometimes when we're like working our job, we get really frustrated and then we're starting to like push really hard. And so this is just sort of a gentler technique that you can do just to help get that all moving. And then there's this feeling of, can you move your jaw without, with your hand, without it like moving it at the same time with your actual jaw muscles, right? So can it be more passive? So like, if you have jaw tension and these muscles are engaged, you're going to kind of fighting it versus allowing it to just be like that. And this is another thing that we're going to do as we're singing. It feels really awkward because it's not like a beautiful sound, but we're thinking about the mechanics of, can I, in some of these moments when I'm singing, still wiggle my jaw? Is it sort of passive and neutral enough to be able to take space? And that'll help it to not block the resonance. Yeah, well, so we'll talk about this when for opera singers, like when you're going to really high pitches, that pressure will actually help to stretch and open those muscles, but we have to do it more internally, and it's more from this kind of a hinge feeling. So when opera singers are going to be good examples of some of like the biggest amount of space, especially for like high soprano notes and things like that. There's a lot of sort of stretching that's required in the vocal tract in this sort of back area. But we just have to make sure that we're doing it the right way, and it's kind of in response to the system of singing. So that would just be like, extreme like high C's and things like that are going to require that. So that's why you see that more with the classical sort of technique. So if you think about it, they're kind of maximizing space with the larynx and this whole space back here so that you get that kind of nice stretch. So I'll show you that too as we go. And it's a really cool feeling when you get it. And it allows these muscles to just be a little more neutral, the external muscles. All of these muscles, the scalene, all these things here, they're only constrictors. So all they can really do is squeeze. So when we think of trying to like open too much, like when someone's like, open your jaw, your mouth, you're usually probably just contracting, right, with those muscles. So that's why this gets really frustrating. And so it's through the process of singing that you'll really find that space or that sensation of space. And it's usually because all the muscles are relaxed that we just get more resonance. And so we feel the sensation of that space. So yeah, we'll keep going into that. So yeah, let's talk about sort of as we start singing, things that you can do. This one's kind of a simple one, but we're trying to use a little bit of the plosive breath pressure of like a blah, and getting that sort of feeling of kind of popping and relaxing down. So the cheeks kind of pop out a little bit. And so you can do that to just sort of feel what it's like to let your jaw just be neutral. When we start singing, that's when immediately we just start to need or feel like we need stability and we start to use these bad habits of like the jaw kind of clenching and rooting down. So this kind of stuff, we're going like blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah, blah. This is very similar, like when Camille does like the dopey mum kind of a thing, right? And you're like, ma, 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 blah, blah, blah. But I like that little bit of plosive to kind of feel that floppiness that we have when we're singing. Again, when we speak, it's very visual. And so we tend to do a lot with sort of the front of our face. When we sing, we want that to be more relaxed. And so it just feels kind of awkward. It's not our typical mode of operating. So it's got to be much floppier. So it's like blah, blah, blah. Now, as you do this, see if you can wiggle it when it's relaxed on the ah and see if your jaw is just kind of hanging neutral, right? That's what we want. So blah, la, 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 la. Again, sounds really weird, but it should be able to move, right? Like la, 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 blah, 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 la, 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 la. Right? If you're fighting yourself, there's some part of you that's holding that jaw open, right? And we want it to just be really neutral. So blah blah blah. So that's sort of the first feeling that we want to get. Again, do some external massage stuff, and then try to get that kind of floppy sort of jaw just hanging neutral. Um, so that's kind of a really really helpful practice for that. And then when we're doing anything, and we're actually going to use the tongue a little bit before we start talking about specifically tongue tension. But one thing also that happens is when we're doing things like creating consonant shapes like M, N, and NG are three really good sort of shapes to think about. They're sort of the main zones for articulation. Oftentimes the jaw is trying to help with that, again, because of the speech-like function that we do, where it's very visual and we see a lot of this kind of stuff happening. So even with like an M, I want to think of that blah kind of neutral position, like blah, and try to make sure that my jaw doesn't come up or do too much, but it's actually more my lips engaging and coming down and covering over the system. This is very similar to like old classical teachers are like, imagine there's like a ball or like a dome space internally. Again, we want to be careful that we're not holding that space because that tends to be a problem. Yes, I love that you're mentioning this. Jaw tension and tongue tension often have a lot to do with support issues. So it's this vicious cycle of we want to relax these things so that we can start to use our lower abdominal muscles and engage in that. And we'll get to that as well in a second. Again, the most issues stem from an imbalance between support pressure and resonance, and those two things together. And then the chord compression and sort of the middle between the two. So yeah, as if we're not supporting our sound appropriately, these muscles all try to create the stability by locking in place, forcing the resonance, right? So that's why sometimes like jaw tension, if I'm like, ha, ah, and I like really tighten it out and push it forward, like I'm creating extra twang by bringing the whole wall forward. And you can do the same thing with the tongue, and those two things can really ram everything forward. We can get lots of twang that way, but it can be very fatiguing if you don't already have that facility and ability to separate the function of the two things. And you're used to doing that without breath pressure, then it's just not going to be enough, right? Ultimately, and it's just going to get very, very over engaged. So it seems really silly, but one of the easiest things is just to do this sort of like blah, blah, blah kind of a feeling. And then when you have it hanging like that, then try to form an M over it. It's going to feel really awkward to like just move the lips over the jaw actually already being pretty loose. So even with the mouth closed, right? And that's kind of what's funny is that you can actually do that. It's more of an internal process. So like, because again, really it's about these muscles back here for the most part. So yeah, I would do that with the M and then kind of move around like a siren. Oh, thank you. That's really great. I love hearing that. That's the whole goal, right? So we're rounding over with that relaxed blah, 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 and then and as I'm engaging support, I'm trying to maintain that same sort of relaxed feeling. So you can do that with an M. This one with the N, this happens all the time as people are singing. They're coming up as they're making an N shape. You don't really have to do that. It's actually just the tongue, tip of the tongue to the hard palate. And you can still wiggle your jaw, even though you're doing an N. So if you're putting a lot of tension and you're ramming your tongue up, tongue and jaw tension start to be kind of connected. So this is a moment where the two things are kind of interconnected. If you're like, I'm locking my jaw, or I can't move it, versus like, so that's just a way that you can start to catch yourself and see if those muscles are engaging when they don't have to. And again, just go back to massaging them, relaxing it. You can even just sort of like kind of shake it out, right? If you can get your jaw super relaxed, you can get it to kind of move freely. Again, these things look really weird on camera, but that's part of the fun of this. um, and then you can try with the NG as well. So the right, that's the very back part, tongue and soft palate. And the same thing, try to keep this front part relaxed. So like, it's all internal, right, with that motion. And so that's what I'm trying to show myself, show you guys, and separate out these systems so that the jaw can just kind of hang freely. So if I'm doing an exercise where I'm like, na, 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 jaw doesn't have to do too much. We want to be expressive. We don't want it to look like we're just like singing like this the whole time. But as we learn to relax that, we can minimize the amount of effort that's happening here, and it'll just feel a little bit softer, floppier. Over time, anyone singing, if you're singing a lot, like you're going to need to do some stuff to relax your jaw because it's just overuse or just using it a lot. Just like being an athlete, we have to make sure we stretch and decompress stuff. So I highly recommend that. And then practicing with these consonants and really feeling that out. Can I be like, na, na, hung, nga, 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 nga. So I'm always doing that. You can even just sort of put your hands here a little bit sometimes as you're singing. So if you're doing an exercise and you're like, whoa, 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 whoa. Oh, great. Well, yeah, good luck. And yeah, catch the rest when you're back. But yeah, I love hearing that. Yeah, isn't that funny? So there's so much just with actually working with the muscles ahead of time before you start practicing. That's just going to save you a lot of agony. So these are all just ways that as we're practicing, we check in, we look in a mirror, and we just have to be mindful of the jaw. It wants to be very, very active. And it tends to actually it doesn't really need to do too much. It mainly just has to kind of get out of the way and get neutral. So what does that feel like when you're just blah, and then once you get that feeling too, if you think of like breathing in the shape of a vowel, like an and having that neutral position right before you start singing, that's really helpful too, because it's already in that sort of position. So, and again, this takes time to really get these muscles to release, and it comes and goes. So you just have to kind of check in with it as part of your practice. Tension release is just something that everyone should be doing. So there's that. And then the other one that, and this is going to be a nice segue into starting to talk about tongue tension things. So the other thing that's really helpful, and this is also so you can start to work your energy into your vocal support, into your breath pressure. Again, breath pressure, it doesn't need that much. It feels like we have to do a lot when all these other things are getting in the way. And then we're starting to try to force the sound. But breath pressure is ultimately kind of a subtle system. And on the extremes of our range, like if you're singing heavy rock music or classical music, you're going to feel a lot of activity. But for the most part, like, it's active whenever we're talking. And so it's pretty autonomic, and it's mainly a subconscious process a lot of the time. We can tune into it and be aware of it not being active because we have tension and these muscles are locking, our head and our neck is coming out and things like that. And we can do exercises to stimulate those muscles, but it's not like your bench, like really actually bench pressing, right? We use that as like an analogy. Just important to kind of point that out. It's more subtle than people would think. It just takes some time to get that subtle coordination. Now, staccato exercises, short detached little bursts are really great to practice. Also keeping your jaw really relaxed. And then it's actually going to be helpful for tongue vowel shapes as well. So you just want to be mindful as you're doing anything. Like, here's an exercise where I'll go like, ha, 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 ha. And I'm just trying to feel that ha, 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 ha. I'm trying to feel my body engage with my belly and nothing going ha, 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 ha. If you're feeling that happening and it's part of that coordination, that's what we're trying to work out. Just isolate these muscles just have that floppy feeling. So again, you might coax yourself into that position by going um, blah 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 blah, and then take a breath through that and be like ha 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 ha, and then I would do it with different vowels. So I'd be like he 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 he. You can do simple exercises. It could just be on a single note, even, right? It could be like ha 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 he. You're gonna start to feel the difference between putting energy through your vocal system with your breath pressure versus when these muscles try to flinch or engage to try and make that happen. And you have to really slow down and see if you can feel the difference. Sometimes it's really hard to actually see it visually, and you can still have a good amount of tension because these muscles are engaging. We'll get to tongue twisters and things like that. I just would be careful. That can help you with your coordination in general. And I like to do that for like focus exercises and stuff. But stuff like tongue twisters and beatboxing and things like that, like it can be a lot of engagement. So you might run the risk of the overuse thing, but you also are conditioning those muscles if you can learn to do them very fluidly, right? And kind of relaxed. So that would be the thing that I'd be careful about. Like I wouldn't be like red leather, yellow leather, red, then you're way over engaging it. Be like red leather, yellow leather, red leather, yellow leather. Like then I'm just working on the coordination and trying to, the big black bug bled blue blood. That might be a good one because it's got a lot of the blah, the kind of the big black bug bled blue blood. Right. Yeah. Again, also a good focus exercise, right? It'll kind of mess with you, but that's just helping your coordination overall. I'd be a little cautious about not doing that, or I wouldn't do that too much. And I use it mainly again for like focus things. So, yeah, we'll get to some tongue stuff now, actually, because I think it's really, really helpful. So again, the jaw stuff can be very, very frustrating, but it's actually a simple solution to just get that more neutral. Now, often the tongue and the jaw kind of are tight together, so we want to start to separate out the two things. So tongue tension is complicated because one, we can't see it a lot of the time, right? It's internal, much more internal. And our tongue is the major mover of our vowel shapes. So it is pretty active when we're singing, but we want to make sure that it's not like rooting or pushing in any direction. So we don't want the tongue to be pushing against the front teeth, getting static, right? And we also don't want it pulling back and locking our throat, getting that kind of throaty backwards L sound. It basically anything you think of wherever the tongue is moving, if it's getting rigid and locking, it's going to make it harder to be flexible and to move from shape to shape. It's going to start to block the resonance. So we want the tongue to feel like it's kind of like floating around. This is tricky, and I'm going to show you a couple exercises that can be fun. The first thing is you can feel some tongue tension under your chin right here. So as you're singing, if you're just like, you want to see if that area can be soft. So it's kind of similar to the jaw thing, but it's subtly different. It's not doing this, but feeling right in here. So if the tongue is pressing or locking, it'll be kind of hard there and you'll feel it pushing back. And again, don't wrench at it. We're just kind of gently wiggling that area a little bit to try and see if we can loosen it up. So that's one thing to gain awareness from this underside. So as we're doing certain exercises, the tongue sometimes wants to do weird things. And this is where we want to be careful. Sometimes people say like, just keep your tongue flat, right? That's not very helpful. In fact, that's going to mess with a lot of things because the tongue has to move up and down to create our main vowel shapes. Like E is high, A, ah, ya, ya, ya. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, if you're trying to like, if you're locking your jaw and you're like, it's harder and harder to actually move your tongue internally too. So that's why we want to release the jaw tension first, and then we deal with the tongue stuff kind of internally, or you kind of want to go back and forth because the two things are going to help each other out. So again, you can feel under here. Now, one thing that happens is that I find is helpful to get our tongue just more neutral too, is like the feeling of what is the neutral tongue, is to practice something where it generally doesn't change as drastically. So we have these vowel pairs like E and U and A and O. And I really like A and O because it's kind of right in the middle. Now, when we go and we round with our lips, a lot of the times the tongue also, and this is just sometimes, it's not with everybody, but I find it's a pattern that happens. The tongue tries to sort of curl and round and make the O shape, and sometimes it pulls back, and we want to actually just do that with our lips instead. It's kind of hard to move the lips independently, especially if you're like an English speaker, that we don't tend to move this lip very much in our sort of accent dialect, especially as you get more and more sort of like southern accent. The lip stays pretty stiff, so it just actually takes some time to get this to move. um, and then what you're trying to do is just do that, but keep your tongue kind of neutral. So simple exercise, but anything where I'm doing this, where I'm like, well, 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 well. I'm trying to get them to separate out, and it does take a little bit of time. Trust me. So I would do a repetition. I'd be like, well, 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 well. And this is the closest feeling to that, like neutral tongue. I'm not purposefully flattening it too much, but I'm trying to keep it pretty neutral feeling. Like it's just sort of like a loose piece of liver just kind of like hanging out there. Like, well, 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 well. And can I move my lips around it without the tongue moving? If you want to make it harder, change the pattern and do like oh, and again, I'm feeling in here and checking for it, like oh, and you'll find the tongue tends to be the gatekeeper to our resonance. So as you relax your tongue like this and you get it more and more neutral, you can get more of that ring in your sound actually. So like whoa, be messy about it, right? It doesn't have to be a perfect exercise. I'm just playing around with that coordination of I'm trying to make sure that my tongue doesn't root down. If it's curling or pulling back, you're going to hear that sort of throaty sound like whoa. Oh, that's tightness there. It's pulling back and in and kind of blocking the motion of the vocal folds. So, or the whole mechanism's kind of making it like a little more static. The tongue again is like draped right over our larynx pretty much. It's it's very connected. So it's like if I'm like moving my tongue up and down, you can see the whole mechanism moving together. Like so. We want to be careful that it's not rooting down to try to make the larynx stable because we don't have good breath pressure, things like that. So here's like a funny trick. Now, be very, very careful about this. I really don't want to hear about someone choking because they did this, because everyone said try this exercise. But this is something that also my teacher did back in the day that was very helpful for me. You can take like an almond or I don't know, something else like a small object that doesn't make you salivate too much. And you're going to put it right here on the tip of your tongue, not too far back. And you're going to practice the same kind of thing, doing like ah, wah, wah, or ao, ao. You don't want to do this with too many different kinds of exercises. This is probably the plenty, right? You don't have to try to over experiment with this because then you might choke. So I'll show you what I mean. And this helps you feel out what your tongue is doing on the top side. It just builds more awareness. So I'll be like this, like, well, well, well. It helps me separate the feeling. Well, well, well. Or I might do the other one, like, wow, and then you might start to notice things like, oh, I do feel my tongue kind of like wanting to pull back. And that awareness is part of this practice. And then you try it without, but you imagine you still have that sensation of the almond there, right? So like, so that's that feeling. Another one that people do sometimes is they'll practice sticking their tongue out, and then having it sort of slide back in to feel that sort of neutral sensation. Sometimes you can like hang your head down, kind of like, oh. Yeah, I know. So be careful with that one, right? Again, it's you want to be very, very gentle with that sort of practice, and don't do any sort of like kind of big breaths, right? We never really want to do that anyways. We want our breath to be really slow and relaxed, like that, and you don't put it too far back. But yeah, anyways, that's just one little tool trick. So if you feel like kind of sketched out about it, like you don't need to do it. But I found that to be kind of helpful at certain moments in my practice. The other thing that you can also pay attention to is just the sensation of your tongue, the front of the tongue hanging out by your bottom teeth, not pushing, but just kind of slightly draped over it. And that can be a good awareness if you're pulling your tongue back, right? So if you're doing like, you know, if you find yourself going like, you're gonna notice it pulling off of your teeth. Um, um, yeah. So you could maybe, but that might just be kind of a little uncomfortable. So again, it could be something very very small too. That like a M&M or like a little like something that's not you're not worried about actually choking onto. So yeah, piece of ice, it's like chip of ice, right? Something like that. I've seen people do that too. But again, if if that's too much, there's all these other tips. I'm just sort of showing these different options, and you're just trying to feel out what is it like to get the tongue neutral for some of these positions. Now, this isn't for everything, right? Again, I was just doing A and O, just a situation where you don't want it to move too much, going from a bright to a dark vowel, is when we tend to get some of these sort of curling sensations with the tongue. So the other thing that we want to practice is just doing our glides. So a lot of the times tongue tension is because we're just trying to lock around a particular vowel shape. So this is why I do all of the yaw kind of stuff, right? And being like, yaw, 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 yeah. Yeah. And again, just like a small, it doesn't have to be like a big piece, right? Just a tiny little thing, just for a little bit of awareness. Yeah. So again, with this thing, I'm feeling out, moving my tongue, like also with the jaw kind of relaxed, like any of the SOVT kinds of things. Yeah, 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 yeah. And knowing that I always have that ability to glide from vowel to vowel. So if you're doing a particular exercise on a vowel, you can always check in and just slide around with the glide just to make sure that it's loose and not locking. So sometimes as I'm doing my practices, I might do that, like be like, zay, ya, 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 ya. Right? So I'm not locked, and then back to zay, ya, 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 ya. And then you can mix that up with the staccato stuff, right? And be like, zay, ya, ha, ya, ya, ya. And that's gonna work like that. So I'm not quite sure what you're asking, God's daughter, but maybe you can ask it a different way. Um, so that's this concept, right, of trying to use these things, making sure giving yourself the opportunity to move around shapes, just to show yourself that you have that space and flexibility. And that's going to help a lot. Now you'll notice I'm doing some of these exercises with like a sixth or like that extra note on the top. That's really helpful to expose when you're trying to do one of these extra compensating things. And it can help you feel this sensation of stretching in the back a little bit, just sort of the beginning of that process. So if I'm like let's do this, like, Whoa, that feeling of, oh, you see how it's just gently a little bit of swivel. It's more of this internal sort of vertical stretch, and that can help you feel like um, that you can feel like you're getting the sense of space. It's really just like a this sort of feeling of kind of unhinging a little bit. Oh, but it happens because of our breath pressure. So that's what I want you to kind of feel out is sort of like sliding, like maybe going like ah to o, like oh. So a lot of people when we're rounding over with our lips, it feels like we're collapsing the space, but we don't have to. We can be like oh, oh, and you're starting to feel out the inertance or that breath pressure actually stretch the system. You could try this with head voice. It's very obvious when you do that. So if I'm like very in that really neutral E shape and like now I'm kind of like my jaw is just loose, and then autonomically because I'm doing this pressure, uh, and I'm just sort of thinking a little bit of this sort of back C shape. It's kind of stretching because of the breath pressure itself. So it's actually more of a passive process. So I'm not trying to like trying to place it and try to actually like control my jaw flow as much as allow it to take space. It's the best way I can explain that. Um, I'm still not quite sure what you're asking, God's daughter. Can you find your drama singing voice? Is that what you mean? I'm not quite sure. So I will answer when I have a better sense of what you're asking me. Um, but yeah, so this feeling is this combination of these two things when we have a loose jaw and our tongue is just lightly in the position, everything can actually stretch and the vowels can take a little bit more space so they don't feel like they're locked in place, right? So at any moment, like I can always reset and then make sure that I'm just sort of draped in that position. Everything up here, again, is just creating a shape, and it shouldn't be responsible for the actual pressure. And so that's the main divide that we're trying to do. It's a little bit more complicated than like just relax, right? Because we want these things to function in the right way, and we're slowly starting to kind of separate them out. And that's really the trick a lot of the time with resonant stuff. Another one that's really helpful for those of you for the tongue tension thing is practicing rolling your R's. This can be a great way to just kind of reset everything. It's kind of like the lip trill of the tongue, right? So instead of like that can be hard for some people. Again, if you're not used to rolling your R's, think of it like doing a bunch of D's, like going and then you kind of blow air through that process. So the tongue is up to the hard palate. And then you can think of using different vowels. Sometimes some vowels are a little more sticky than others for people. So I'll go through different vowels and be like, har, here, or, and then here's a weird one is to actually try doing some gentle sirens with the tongue roll. So going like, just like with the lip trill, because it's in that sort of process of flapping, it helps the muscles just reset and get loose, right? If I'm like, and then you can actually even move your tongue forward and backwards as you're doing this, just to reset the position. So going like, again, very weird thing to do on a camera, but that can help you feel this sort of tingly, buzzy, sort of soft sensation with the tongue. And that can help you as you're doing your exercises. It just feels a little bit more neutral. So like try an exercise like this where we're gonna move the tongue a little bit and be like ha ya 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 ya. Just be mindful. Do you tend to press too high? Does it tend to pull back yaw and kind of lock or nya, nya? What direction are you going? And can you keep it more in the middle and be like ha ya 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 ya, and that's just kind of floating there. And then you might practice like ha 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 ya he he ha ya 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 ya. So that can be very very helpful. Another thing that you can do, so that's kind of like for the tongue, using that glide, right, to feel that sensation of actually creating a little bit of space and scanning the space. Yeah, 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 from the inside out. The wah one is really good for your jaw. So this is also a feeling of getting a little bit of that extra space and sort of dropping and swiveling. Again, this is for particular kinds of sounds, right? Is like create a lot of space. It starts to sound more classical, right? Once you learn this control, it's not that it has to be open and like that kind of maximize thing. That's, as we go to our higher notes, we often need a little bit more of that. It needs to be a little bit looser. But there's plenty of times where we're using twang and these other things. So it's really just gaining control over it. And then you can actually close off the space, but in a gentle way. You can create a little bit of that belty sort of spread thing, but it's not overly engaged to the point where you're not in control of it, right? You've lost control of the reins. So for the wah thing, it's the same kind of a thing. I can use that to sort of gently scan and just make sure that my jaw is flexible is kind of mostly the important thing. So if I'm doing this one, right? No, 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 no. That's all right. Yeah, this happens to a lot of people. It's just sometimes the timing of it. And maybe we'll play around with changing the time a little bit just to get this more available to people. But you can always go back and look at the recording. So even though I'm doing an N here, and I'll do it with the W to show you, I can still feel a little bit of that W sensation. So let's say I start and I'm going like, whoa, 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 whoa. I'm using the glide, mainly kind of like the blah thing, just to kind of set it down. But it can help me just get a little bit of that extra stretch if I need it. Don't overdo this technique. Again, people focus so much on this and then they're not using their vocal support. You don't really need that much, nor can you actually create like that much space. And it's not necessary. Some people just have like very large mouths and can actually open up a lot. But if you don't have that, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't produce a lot of good internal relaxation to vibrate. So we all have to find sort of our limits with this kind of stuff too. So pay attention to that. But so then let's say I'm doing this like whoa, 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 whoa. Now I'm doing it with an N and it might get kind of stuck. I might be like, no, 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 no. It's just a little too thin for what I maybe want for my sound in this particular moment. I want it to amplify more resonance, sound a little bit bigger. I can think of that W in there without actually saying it. So I can be like, no, 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 no. Like I'm going, no, 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 no. But I'm just doing it a little bit more subtly, like, no, 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 no. It's in the O shape, actually, that I'm creating that a little bit of extension and stretch. So these are healthy ways that you can start to kind of feel a little bit of stretch, going like ya 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 ya, whoa, 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 whoa. And that you can actually carry over into words where you don't use that, and you can still actually get the same kind of motion. So it's mainly just about this swivel, right? And that just helps me stay fluid and flexible. I think the most important concept is that everything is going somewhere. So if there's a little bit of transition and movement, that's actually helpful rather than just completely like trying to keep it locked in place, right? So this is what's tricky about it. It's like, I'm like, first learn how to keep it still. Then feel out kind of the range of motion, and then see if you can just get it to move more passively as you're doing your exercises, right? So it's creating space as I go, kind of as an indirect force. So I highly recommend like do this kind of stuff before you start singing a song, and then see like where in the song is there some tension, and where can I do my exercises to kind of create a new sensation and feeling around it. You might need to go back and do some stretching and do some massaging stuff, and then come back to your exercises, and I mean come back to your song and see if you can feel that out. So it's this is kind of the process, and every once in a while I'm going through like particular vowel shapes and things, and just trying to see like, okay, my E vowel is feeling a little tight, or I get kind of locked around it. Can I get that looser? Can I be like, wa, we, he. So it can start to do that, right? And if it's stuck, and I'm like, it'll start to kind of get tight, and the vowel might not start stretch enough, right? As I go to like a higher note. So I mean, we might like do like we. I want it to be able to have a little bit of motion. If it's we, it might get stuck in my nose. It might kind of be a little bit too thin, or I might cause myself to kind of crack because it's sort of locked up the system so much. So again, we're trying to find that. I'm kind of just gently sort of tracking with it. So subtle is really important here. Less is more. And then when we're dealing with articulation, just because someone was mentioning the tongue twister thing, the main trick, a lot of times people are trying to make tongue twisters like faster and faster. That's like a fun coordination sort of mental exercise. But a lot of times for good diction, this is where people get like a lot of tension too. And someone's like, you need to enunciate. And you're like, that's too much sort of striking and too much tightening. It's really just about the length that you spend on each consonant. And that's going to make it much better to be understood. So we're just spending more time being like, my name is, right? And then I'm really thinking about what's the shape of everything that I'm saying. It's not force. It's just a little bit more time thinking about that particular shape. So why am I? So you see the difference is like, if I can do these isolation things, then I can actually make my sound more clear. I have a distinction between that vowel, the E vowel compared to the A vowel, and they have a slightly different resonance to them. And my M consonant compared to my N consonant, right? Like all of these things have a subtle, a different place and position. And that makes it easier to understand rather than trying to put force into it, right? And so that's the danger. And it's the same concept that I've been talking about, right? A lot of times when we're unaware of what we're doing, we try to just sort of work harder. And then that usually leads to more of this tension and more sort of static shapes and like lots of sort of extreme changes. And the voice functions best when we have these more subtle sort of stretching kind of changes that are more gradual. Just think of anything like a physical exercise, right? That you're doing. You want to have a nice sort of integrated, synchronized motion between all of your muscles and your breath, right? And then the other thing to say is, as you work on all of these things, the secret sauce is always just trying to sing on your breath. So thinking about sort of the arc and flow of your breath support, and that's going to help all of these muscles just kind of float. So I like to use the analogy of like we're surfing a wave when we're singing. It's like these muscles are the muscles that are surfing, right? That are on the board and kind of adjusting to the current. And our breath pressure is what's creating the current underneath. And those two things kind of work together like that. So this is a complicated thing to explain. I can break down these individual exercises, but ultimately we're trying to get this sort of fluid ability to be responsive. These muscles relax and sort of float as our breath pressure engages. And that's like an integrated experience that you have to do through practice, through singing and performing, and have a teacher be like, yes, that's it. And you'll know when you feel it. You start to get into the zone and your muscles are all just sort of working together in the right the right way. Strangely enough, though, again, the singing practice, they feel kind of like two separate systems, right? This is doing something and it feels like it's relaxing. Well, these lower muscles are engaging, right? And so there's this opposition that happens. We have to slow down and be able to feel that out. That's really what I find is going on most of the time with people's songs. So slow down phrase by phrase when you're working on a song and see if you can take note of where you're starting to flinch or lock up, and use an exercise like one of these things, like just turning it into ya, or like even the na. Simple things like this can be really effective if you're just slowing down and being patient and aware of what you're doing, right? Because a lot of times people are just doing it over and over again and they're just training the same habit, right? And they're not aware that everything is moving at the same time, especially when we're nervous, right? This tends to happen. We tend to sort of like overly engage, or we are breathing shallow and we're off of our body, and so everything kind of locks up in place. It's a way we protect ourselves, right? So you always want to work um, on trying to uh, relax down into your breath before you start singing. That's the first thing that I'm always trying to feel out, and working on getting more comfortable performing. Anxiety, all these things are going to obviously play a role in this too. As much as you practice relaxing your muscles, you might find that in the heat of the moment, we flinch and we lock up. It comes with experience and practice and a willingness to be okay with making mistakes. I've had plenty of times like trying to sing like a high note and have like a crack or something happen until you get more and more comfortable with it. It's just par for the course. I remember in like high school and college and things, like working on certain songs, and like everyone's listening and you kind of like are nervous and you crack and then you tighten up and stuff. Sometimes it's like the crack is like a good moment to actually let go, right? Your body is doing it for you and is trying to get you to relax around whatever you're holding. And so if you just, no shame in that, like, yeah, people like laughed at me or whatever. It was like a little moment of like, oh man, but I was still like, I'm the one who can sing this song, and I ended up doing really great in the heat of the moment, performing, being in my character, feeling connected to the music I'm making, and we're less likely to think about that kind of stuff. So this is the reason I'm talking about this is we go through focusing on separating things out, and then finding like a nice fluid integrated motion. And then ultimately we want to try and forget about it as we're singing. So it's just something we want to check in with every once in a while. This becomes like a vicious cycle, right? If you're overly focused on your jaw tension, sometimes it makes it worse. Try relaxing your tongue and work on that for a little bit. Work on your breath, and you might find it also helps you. Oh yeah, let's finish with this last question before I go, because I think it's a good one. So we were talking about like engaging muscles in your legs, hands, or arms as a means of channeling tension away from the neck and throat. I think you have to be careful with this, because we can chase tension around our body, and the myofascial world is also intricately connected. So sometimes people will like hold the back of a piano to like get their stability, and that's can actually create that stiffness in the shoulder, and then create things. One thing that people do, and you'll see this all the time, like I do it too, even sometimes when I'm singing, is I will externalize, almost like it's like a little like qigong, or sort of I'm externalizing the extension of what I'm trying to feel, this sort of down and out motion, so that it feels like it's more integrated into my body. So one thing that you can, this is kind of, you can imagine me doing this at home by myself, but I sometimes will sing and practice. It's almost like you're like dancing around a little bit, like not to be a weirdo, but here I am. So you can actually practice kind of synchronizing your motion with, like don't like be super crazy, like leaping around. But if you do that, then you're having more of an integrated expression, but keep it moving. It's actually the same concept, right, as what I'm doing with these small things, that everything is sort of moving in a direction. Even as you're practicing, sort of changing your weight with your feet can be very, very helpful, so that you're not locking in place. People sometimes have all sorts of tensions where you're like curling your toes, things like that. And I think that tends to actually always be something that's going to be a little harmful ultimately. So I'd be careful about like holding your fist or something like that, or thumb in the pocket. These are all like habits that actually are pretty common. Those are things that actually will work their way up into your voice as well. So shake it out, shake your hands out. As you're singing, it's really okay to every once in a while, like change your weight, maybe step forward or back in just a little bit, just to keep yourself grounded and feeling like you're not like locked in place at the same time. So yeah, and locking your knees, you have to be very, very careful of that. In fact, sometimes one thing that I'll talk about is as you're singing high notes, think about gently sort of dropping down back of, for me, it's like the back of my chair, but just this gentle sensation of sinking. If you're like a guitar player, sinking back a little bit is a great way to sort of counteract our temptation to want to lift. Locking the knees can actually mess with our blood flow, and we can get kind of lightheaded and things like that. So it's a good thing just to pay attention to what are your habits of locking, right? They always come from that sort of anxiety response. And it's a way that we're trying to create stability. And I'll lead with one other really interesting one. If you ever get the ability to do this, I've seen it work really well. It just is, it can be a weird sort of, um, it can be a weird experience just standing on a stage, singing to people. If you're like kind of elevated above people, and it can kind of give you like vertigo, you can get kind of disassociated from that. One thing that I found was really helpful is to, if you can, practice on a stage, sitting down, sit down cross-legged, sit on the floor, sit on the edge of the stage and practice singing like that. Just to start to kind of get comfortable with the stage. So you don't feel sort of like alien, just kind of floating and standing there. We get really ungrounded as we do that. So if you're like in a show or things like that, you could, if people are open to it, you can practice it like that. And sometimes that can actually just help you break that pattern, whatever you're doing. It's a grounding technique, right? It's something where you're like, you're safe on the ground rather than trying to like lock something to feel like you're not going to float away, right? That's part of that sort of rising energy of anxiety. So it takes practice. It really does. And something, it comes and goes, and we learn different tools to kind of note it. And, as you get through it every time and you take the risk, it gets a little less scary. So that's part of it, is like, just don't give up on it. Don't let yourself fail by running away, right? Ultimately, like, you're not going to die. Embarrassment, all of these kinds of things are part of the process, and it's helpful as an artist to actually allow yourself that space and that grace to be human and to be exploring and willing to make some mistakes, right? Growth state mentality. Yeah, and you want to try and integrate your practice, your exercises directly into your song work, right? So always, like, that's sort of a hard thing with this kind of content, is like, yeah, I wish I could like show you that. Often in lessons, that's exactly what we're doing, is working through some exercises that are tailored to whatever particular song we're doing. Yeah, and so this is a tricky thing, and performance is like, always feels like a little different, its own headspace. So yeah, we want it to be muscle memory, just like what you explained, and that's ultimately the process here, right? Is, if anyone who's new to this and kind of like, wow, there's a lot of things to think about, it's too much. The point is, we have our practice so that it's in our muscle memory, just like what SC vocal student was talking about, so that we can trust our body, right? That's always the concept here, is like, my practice is where my confidence comes from. And I say, to myself, I've done this a bunch of times already. It's in my body. I have to trust my body and trust myself and get lost in the music. And that's always the goal. Easier said than done. But I remind myself that like a mantra, because I have that practice. I have the memory of accomplishing it. And that muscle memory is a really powerful tool. And the more you do that and you shine in front of an audience, the more that this starts to kind of melt away. So, good luck with it. And again, tension is, I think this is a really powerful part of the practice, because it extends to other things we do, right? You'll start, as a singer, you become more aware of like all these other tension things, how you hold your body, how you're reacting to emotions and things like that. And that can be really, really helpful as an overarching wellness activity. So flip it around. It's not like, oh, my singing practice needs to be perfect and all this tension I'm carrying into it. It's like, my singing practice can actually help me open up, as a whole lifestyle. And then I think it becomes more lasting. So with that, I will let y'all go. Thanks again for following all of this. I love all the familiar names. and that you all are being part of this and contributing. It's really makes it a much more enjoyable experience. So thank you, very grateful, and I will catch y'all next time for sure. I think we're doing some style stuff, so we'll be kind of flipping around. We've been doing a lot of technique things, and so maybe we'll do a little bit more song work, and I'll try to pull out some public domain songs that aren't quite, they're not too cringy, but like there's always a challenge with public domain songs. So I will see you all there, and yeah, have a good rest of your day. Take care, everyone.